Hi everyone, I'm Shelly from There's No Place Like Home at redheadmom8.wordpress.com. I'm going to go against the grain with today's video again. And yeah, this is about homeschooling again, but it's something that I think that a lot of more traditional homeschoolers will disagree with what I have to say. But what I'm going to say is, let's be honest about high school. As a homeschool mom, I have been around plenty of other homeschooling parents, and I have seen the effect that having a teenager who is entering the high school years can have on a parent. It can be nerve-wracking. It's completely unknown territory if you've never gone through it before. And if you look at high school through the lens that society does, it really comes as no surprise that it's going to be as intimidating as can be. And so what usually ends up happening for those parents who are homeschooling high schoolers is that no matter how relaxed they were, no matter how unschoolish they were, very often they will revert back to those schoolish methods that they might have sworn off years before, simply because they want to make sure that they do it right or that they are preparing their child for college. And, so what I wanted to talk to you about today is I wanted to actually, first of all, ask you a question, and I want you to really think about this and, think long and hard. How much do you honestly remember from high school? I'm not talking about your friends. I'm not talking about the dances or about the get-togethers that you might have had. I'm talking about the actual academics. How much do you remember from high school? If you're anything like me, it's not going to be much. Most of the things that I learned that have really helped me out in life are those basic things that I learned in elementary school. How to read, how to write, how to perform basic math skills. And a lot of the things that I learned in high school have had absolutely no bearing in the real world for me. And yeah, there are some things that I remember from high school. Those are typically those things that I either picked as electives because I had a genuine interest in them, or something that I did enjoy. And to be honest with you, most of the things that I enjoyed were those electives that I picked. So, some of the things that I remember from high school, I remember my parenting classes. Here I am. Look at me, 11 kids now. I remember my cooking classes. I remember some of my nutrition classes, and I remember a lot of my theater arts classes, just because I was one of those drama geeks. But when it comes down to what I learned for history, what I learned for science, learning college algebra and trigonometry, none of those things have ever helped me in any way as an adult, ever. So one thing that John Taylor Gatto says multiple times in so many of his books is that high school really is, the purpose of high school is like an extension of childhood. And really the same can be said very often for college too. Back years ago, decades ago, it was very common for a 13-year-old to be holding down an actual meaningful job where they were doing meaningful work and they were doing things that were productive in society. But what has happened is the extension of the compulsory school age has stretched out childhood, where now you have people even in their early 20s, some people who have never even held down a job. And you know what? That's not good. So you might look at all of these subject areas that you think that your kids should be learning in high school because it's those last 4 years. But if you're spending too much time on those books, if you're spending too much time doing school just for the sake of doing school, you're taking your child out of the real world. You're taking them away from the things that are going to teach them about adulthood. So I just want to give you some tips that I've learned now as we've been homeschooling. I have 2 homeschool graduates now. I'm going to have another one this coming May or June. I haven't decided yet. But, first of all, I want you to think about these things. Think about letting your high schooler take the reins on their education. Instead of having them follow a curriculum or a subject plan just because, your local high school may do things that way, or because your favorite curriculum company says that you should do things that way, or because other homeschooling families that you interact with might be doing things that way. I want you to think about letting your teenager take the reins, letting them choose things that they are interested in. Let them choose the topics that they want to pursue. Because, as I mentioned before, if you are having them do all of these subjects that they really aren't interested in, sure, they might get A's on their tests. They might write a good term paper here and there. That doesn't mean that it's going to stick with them and that it's ever going to affect anything. The best thing that you can do for your teenager is to trust them to do those things that they think are going to have the most impact on their future. And very often it doesn't look like much of what a school would do. Another thing that I really suggest that you do with your teenagers, let them manage their time. I know that so many people get upset if their teenagers are sleeping late, for example, because they say, how will my teenager ever be able to get up for a job if they want to sleep till noon every day? And so first of all, let me just say that, scientific studies have proven that teenagers really do need more sleep. And second of all, I want to say that not all jobs are first shift. There are second shift jobs. There are third shift jobs. But even for those teenagers who have always been night owls and who do get first shift jobs, it doesn't take years of training for them to learn how to just listen for an alarm clock and get up for that. That's one thing that I especially learned with my oldest daughter. She was one of those night owls. She would very often be doing her schoolwork in the middle of the night, and she was very, very rarely up before lunchtime. But when she got her first part-time job, she was very often expected to be there at 6:30 in the morning. It was never an issue. It's not something that we had to practice doing for weeks before she started. It was as simple as her setting the alarm on her phone, turning the volume up, and just listening for it to go off. Because if something is important to your teenager, if it's something that they want to do, they're going to do it. And I think that we just all too often get these ideas into our head that everything has to be done a certain way, and that certain way often has to look like what school would do or what somebody going to school would do. And that's just not how it is. I think that we make things far more difficult than what they actually have to be. So if give your teenager the opportunity to manage their time. Trust them. And I'm not saying to let them get away with not doing things that they really have to do. They do need to learn responsibility along the way, but they are going to learn to be more responsible if they see that you as the parent are trusting them to do the right thing. So another thing that I think that you really need to consider with your teenager is to let them get a job and learn the life skills that come with it. Now, I mentioned that my oldest daughter had a part-time job. She was in 12th grade when she got her first job. And I remember that at first, since she was homeschooled, they were giving her pretty many hours because she could work during the day where other teenagers could not. And she was a good worker. And I have to say, she was never late. My night owl, who had to be at work at 6:30 in the morning, was never late. She was a really good employee. And so, yeah, they would give her lots of hours. She would work lots of days. And so sometimes I used to get really nervous about her schoolwork, and I would constantly be on her about that. Did you do this? Did you do that? Did you finish this assignment? Are you working on this paper? Do you remember about this? And my daughter, she's very, very laid back, and she would always just tell me not to worry about it. And what I realized is that I didn't need to be worrying about that because, yeah, she was getting the things done, but at the same time, those skills that she was learning at that job were having far more of an impact on her than completing section 1.2 in her history textbook would have. So you need to think about that. I know that a lot of parents are afraid to let their high schoolers get jobs because they want them to focus on their studies. But what you need to remember is that that job is going to help them out more in the long run than their studies ultimately will. Another thing that you really need to think about with your teenager is to let them learn from their mistakes and to face the consequences. And, a teenager who is micromanaged isn't really going to experience that. And the thing is that your teenager will never know what it means to succeed if they don't ever have the opportunity to know what it means to fail. You have to let your kids fail at certain things so that they can understand the sweet reward of success. And that is a really important lesson. You're not always going to be there for your teenager. So allow them the opportunity to face consequences and to be able to make mistakes while they are still at home with you under your wing. And you can be there kind of as a cushion when they fall, and that you don't wait until they are out there on their own and fall flat on their face with no one to turn to. So I know that this is tricky. So many parents just completely freak out about the whole high school thing. But I challenge you to break out of that mold and start mentoring your children on what it means to be an adult, the things that they need to learn to do to be an adult. Why do you think that you need to replicate school? Do you replicate school just so that you can say that you did? Just so that you can feel like, okay, this is what I was supposed to do, and this is what other people do, so I'm going to do it. Why replicate school if it is something that is not going to stick with your kids, and if it is not something that is going to benefit your kids? Use these last 4 years that they are in school, that they are being homeschooled to kind of transition into adulthood and stop worrying so much about those textbooks. If you're worried about college, if you're worried about, them having to be prepared for the SATs, I understand that. But there are a lot of SAT prep books out there. There are SAT prep classes out there. Do you really want to design your teenager's entire homeschool career, or at least their last 4 years, just based on one test? Do you really want to focus all that time just for one test? And I can reassure you that if your child has had an adequate amount of time learning to develop those writing skills, the reading comprehension, those math skills, they are going to do well on those tests. The daughter that I've spoken of a few times in this video, that last senior year, she ended up not spending as much time on her schoolwork as I thought she was going to because of this job. Now, I have to say that, in Pennsylvania, they only need 3 math credits. So she already had the 3 math credits. We were just doing kind of like a review year for the 4th year, but she ended up not doing math very often. So when it came time for her to do her placement test for college, she was a little worried about the math because she hadn't been doing it for a while. She spent about 2 days, I'm guessing, I don't really remember exactly, but she spent a few days on a math website completely on her own. I didn't even know that she was doing it. I just went up into her room and I just said to her, "Hey, what are you doing?" And she said she was on a math website studying for her placement test. She did this on her own. When she took the placement test, she did awesome. In fact, she did better than her friends who were in school who took the placement test. So that's where that trust comes in with your kids. But again, if you're worried about those sorts of things, they do have SAT prep books. But I want you to really think about if that one test is worth having all of your child's attention being focused on just because of that, instead of developing their interests, instead of learning how to research things that they want to learn about, instead of developing skills that are going to help them in their future, and not things that you just need to check off of a box, but that will never affect them again. And I'm just going to leave you with this last bit of advice. A well-rounded student doesn't need to be immersed in schoolwork. A well-rounded student needs to be immersed in life. That is how you will help your teenager the best. And I want you to think about that as you plan your homeschoolers' high school years. Anyway, that's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one over on Instagram, because YouTube usually disables my comments. You never know anymore because they've been leaving them on once in a while. Who knows? If you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have, I hope you have a great day.